Miss me? Nah. 30 minutes since our last confession. Well, I'm glad to see more of you here than before. If you weren't able to make it to the first class, I understand that was a strange back of time, but hopefully all of you are able to attend. Okay. I'm going to turn the attendance on now. If you can please sign in. Okay. Please sign in when you can. Okay. All right. Let me summarize from last class all of 25 minutes ago before I go to this class. We did 3 foundational cases from the Roberts Court. I'm sorry, I confuse them all the time. From the Marshall Court. We did Marbury, we did McCullough, we did Gibbons, and briefly we did Barron. These.
I'm sorry. Quick question about attendance. How do we know if we counted in? Because I have it says four absences. I don't even know how that's possible.
Talk about after class.
Okay. Sorry.
7 of you figured it out, so most of you got it. Okay. These are foundational cases from the Marshall Court. And the reason why they're foundational is that they pave the way for the growth of the central government. In terms of the institution of judicial review, Marbury. In terms of the Commerce Clause, Gibbons. In terms of the Necessary and Proper Clause, and McCullough. These decisions allow the central government to grow by leaps and bounds. But as I explained in the last class, constitutional law is not a fixed line. This is not like contracts. We have a restatement first and a restatement second. Okay, we know a restatement second. ConLaw fluctuates over the years depending on who's on the court. And the trajectory of today from Story's opinion in Prigg to Chase's opinion in Dewitt to the later decisions in E.C. Knight during the Progressive Era case are not consistent. And one of the challenges you're going to face is how to reconcile these various strands. So I want to start you off with a question for today to see what you learned 45 minutes ago. Feels like forever ago, doesn't it? Okay. So this is your question. A, B, C, D. Which enumerated power in Article 1, Section 8, the Chief Justice Marshall rely upon in McCullough v. Maryland to uphold the constitutionality of the Bank of the United States? A, Commerce Clause. B, Taxing Power. C, Necessary and Proper Clause. D, all the above. Okay. Give you another 20 seconds. So we should learn half an hour ago. Okay, a few more seconds. Okay. Who was last in the last class? Who was the call on last? Okay. All right. So we're going this way. You're next, right? Yeah, you're next. Gabriel, what'd you put here? And if you don't have a pen card, you can take one after class, okay? So Gabriel, what'd you put here?
C.
You put C. Why'd you put C?
Because it was necessary and proper for the court to hold that we needed a national bank. to establish order in the nationwide state.
Okay, but let's look at the necessary and proper clause, right? Where is it? I don't have it here. If you go to your Constitution, I think it's on page, it's Article 6. It's on page 50. Yeah, page 54, supremacy clause. Okay? And it says the Constitution. Oh, I'm sorry, I said the wrong thing. I meant necessary and proper clause. Thank you. You're right, Jonathan. All right. So the necessary and proper clause, page 37, right? It says to make all laws which be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, right? Gabriel, what are the foregoing powers referred to there? When it says the foregoing powers, right? What's it referring to there in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18?
Enumerated powers?
Okay, which enumerated powers are those? Taylor, what are the foregoing powers referred to there?
The powers that are expressed in the Constitution,
Okay, give me examples of what those might be.
to tax and
Good.
regulate commerce.
Very good, right? So the necessary and proper says Congress has the power to make all laws that are necessary and proper to carry into execution the foregoing powers. And Taylor's right. Those are the other ones listed in Article 1, Section 8, which is taxing, regulation of commerce, etc. So, is that Amber?
Yeah.
So let's go back to our question, right? The Chief's opinion in McCullough v. Maryland, was it based solely on the necessary and proper clause?
No.
Okay, explain more.
It was also based on the Commerce Clause, that in order to regulate commerce throughout the states, it was necessary and proper to have a bank in order to do that.
Very good. Okay. That's a correct statement of McCullough, right? What Marshall said is in order to regulate commerce effectively, a bank was a necessary tool to do it. In order to tax, a bank was an appropriate tool to do it. In order to have coining of money, a bank was an appropriate tool to do it. So, right? The reason why the bank could exist was to carry into execution their commerce powers, their taxing powers, right? But does that answer the question? Right? Let's see what you guys put. Put the results up. Good for you, okay? Mostly right. So about 60% of you put C, necessary and proper. And about a third of you put D, all the above. The correct answer is C here. Okay? But I want you to understand why it's not D. So Amber correctly said, she's 100% correct. The bank was used as a means to regulate commerce. The bank was used as a means to tax. The bank was used as a method to express currency, to exchange the money at the time, right? But that wasn't the basis for which it was upheld. The bank was upheld because of the necessary and proper clause. That is, the necessary and proper clause is an independent grant of power. An independent grant of power to do stuff. It's listed in Article 1, Section 8. So even though, let me go back to the language. So even though it references foregoing powers, right? You have to know what the foregoing power is. It has to link back to something else in Article 1, Section 8. It's almost always going to be commerce. If you're not sure in the exam, just guess commerce, you're probably right. But this will almost always link to something back, commerce. Almost always. But the bank was not upheld under Congress's commerce powers. It was upheld under the necessary and proper powers. Most law students don't grasp this. They think, oh, it's commerce plus necessary and proper. Not exactly. The necessary and proper is independent power. It's an independent power that links back to it, but it's a separate issue. Does that make sense, everyone? Right, so everyone see why the answer is C and not D on our poll question, right? The answer is C and not D. Okay. A couple of you put A and B, those are just wrong altogether, but this is really a choice between C and D. That's where the action was. Everyone with me? Okay. So the question then is, how do we define two words in the Constitution? That's our goal for today, right? How do we define commerce, and how do we define necessary? We learned in Gibbons, all 30 minutes ago, that commerce is defined very broadly to include intercourse, exchange. We learned from Marshall McCullough that necessary means adapted to, convenient, appropriate, these sorts of words. In our first case, Prigg, Justice Story, who's basically a disciple of Marshall, who's a good friend of his, reads those words in very much the same fashion. Later, Chase in Dewitt does not read it the same as did Marshall. And then later in the legal tender cases, the court goes back and forth on this in the span of a couple of years. And then we get to the progressive era, they take a narrow understanding. So what you need to keep straight in your mind is that the meaning of commerce and the meaning of necessary aren't fixed. They fluctuate based on decisions of the court. Everyone with me so far? Any questions on the polling question? I love these polling questions because they help bridge the gap from our last class to this class. Even better ones only hit an hour ago. But here we are. Okay. Oh, syllabus. Okay. Let me go over the syllabus. Thank you for knowing reminding me. I remembered myself. Where is it? There we go. Spring 2018. Okay, syllabus link. Okay. So as I'm sure you all know by now, I don't use Stanley for anything except for emailing. If you want to see what's going on today, if you go to my blog, there's a link for classes. You'll see a link for classes. Spring 2018 ConLaw. Click that. This is a syllabus. One of the virtues of this class is I stay on schedule. I never fall behind. So whenever I tell you we're covering something, that's when we're covering it. That's why I was so immediate to schedule a makeup, because I don't like falling behind. You never catch up. It never, ever works. I'm sure with your class in the spring, you never quite got up from the Harvey stuff. So we are right on target, right where I want to be. And it's also weird starting on a Thursday, because we only have one day that week. Then you get MLK Day, and then 2 days off, so this is entire disruption. It's not a good way to start a semester, but we'll make up. If you want to email me, please use that address. If you use my STCL address, I'll get it, but that will get your reply quicker, which is what all of you actually want. My office is 623. Please come visit me. I'm there. Okay, you have the book. It's a third edition of the book. If you find any typos or errors in the book, please tell me. I can fix them. You are the first class to use a third edition. It's brand spanking new. We did a lot of revisions over the summer. I think it's a much better book than it was before, but there are always various kinks in new editions. So please tell me if you find any mistakes. I will not be offended. I will thank you in fact. I've already found a handful myself while I'm reading through it, which is frustrating, but when you write an 1,800-page book, it's inevitable. Okay. The exam, which is all any of you actually care about in this class, whether it's a mistake, will be completely open book. Your notes will not help you. You can bring whatever you want, commercial outline, supplement, the Bible, I don't care. It won't help you. Nothing will help you. The best way of doing well on this exam, of doing well in the exam, is to take my old exams. I posted all of my old exams, going all the way back. At some point this semester, you should take all of them. I also post the A+ answer. I'll have to put the A+ answer from the last one. I didn't do it yet, but I have it. We'll have a midterm in class. It'll be graded. The midterm will basically be half of the final exam. So the final exam has 2 questions, it's 3 hours. The midterm will be 1 question, 90 minutes. Okay. I will grade it, and I will meet with every one of you to go over it. That's one of the things I do. It's a lot of time, but I think it's worth it. Everyone will make an appointment to meet with me, and we'll go over your midterms. And again, the A+ paper in midterm gets a Hamilton ticket, so there's your incentive. You have a bigger class, so it's a little bit harder to pull that off in past semesters, but I have faith in you. In terms of attendance, I use the clicker. I'll usually leave the polling session open for about a minute, and then I'll shut it down. So if you're not here right when class starts, you're absent. So please be on time. This is a 10:40 class, not a 9 a.m. class, so your excuses are not as big. Traffic is not as bad. If parking's a problem, just get here earlier. We'll be here all day anyway. I will also use the clicker for polling questions. The purpose of these polling questions is to get your juices flowing to think about the material. You're not great on these, so if you get this question wrong, I'm not going to pull you down at all. But if I see that you're not participating in these questions, I will say something, because you should be doing these. These are for your own benefit. The instant reinforcement helps. When you see, oh crap, I put D instead of C, whatever. That's what these questions are supposed to do, to give you immediate feedback. My office hours are immediately after this class, so come upstairs, 623, please talk to me. If you want to email me, I encourage you to do that. I'm usually very quick. If the question is anything substantive, my response will be, come see me in office hours. I'm not going to handle long questions by email. It's not helpful for anyone. If you talk to me in person, it will be much easier. You pay a lot of money for law school. You get a professor as part of what you pay for. Please come talk to me. My lectures are all online. All of them. The best way to prepare for this class is not with a supplement or anything else, is by watching my old lectures. They're all on YouTube. If you want to know what question I'm going to ask, see what I asked last year. It won't be exactly the same, but it'll probably be pretty similar. I'm not that original. I'm not that creative. I know that light's flickering. Sorry. I don't know if I can turn it off. I have no idea. I'm not that creative. One tip you can use, YouTube lets you watch things at double speed or 1.5 speed. So if you want to watch the video on your way to school or on your way home, you can listen to it. On the elliptical or the treadmill, you can listen to it. It sounds like an awful idea, but it's actually a very good use of your time. Some students watch the videos before they do the reading. Some students watch videos after they do the reading. It's your preference. There are advantages and disadvantages to both, but you should watch them beforehand. Also, I think I mentioned this earlier, my co-author Randy Barnett, who's at Georgetown, and I are producing a series of videos, short 5-6 minute videos about every case in the book. We have 8 videos up so far. I assigned the Marbury video. I hope you found that helpful. If that helpful? Good. Eventually, we'll have videos for every book in the class. That's probably 60 or so videos for the semester. Unfortunately, you won't have those. You'll have the first 8. Those are very expensive and time-consuming, but we're working on them over the years. So I encourage you to watch those where they're assigned, but focus on the YouTube lectures. Again, the schedule is what it is. I don't deviate. We will stay exactly where I say, so whatever we say we're covering, we're covering. And we are right on schedule with our double whammy. I am very grateful for this marathon session. I'm doing 2 property classes today and 2 ConLaw classes, so I'm going to be dead by about 5 o'clock. Basically, was it about 7 hours of class today teaching. But I will hope I'll be alive by the end of it. Okay, I'll be okay. I get energized doing this, you have no idea. I have fun. Okay. So, and today, that brings us today, we're doing a new doctrine of enumerated powers with the Taney, Chase, and Progressive Courts. And let me just pause what I mean by that. When I say the Marshall Court, the Taney Court, the Chase Court, I'm referring to the Chief Justice, right? Whenever there's a new Chief Justice, we refer to it as the court under that chief. Now, you know, individual justices come and go, but when I say the Marshall Court, Marshall is the chief for 33 or 34 years, right? The Taney Court, Taney was chief for maybe 20 years, Chase maybe 15 years. You need to start learning general years. I know someone asked me about math in my other class. Someone said, we need to know math and property. Well, a little bit. Here the numbers you need to know are years. You need to start understanding years. And when you put your notes together for your outline, keep the years straight. Because you should know at which point in time you are and which court you're in. And that will help you immeasurably when you're answering your final questions. Okay, questions about the syllabus or the semester or anything else? And you are a very large section. Last semester, my ConLaw people, ConLaw had 44 people. You're about 90. So it's much bigger. So the name cards help. Please bring them. And if you can put them on top of your laptop, that helps me a lot because I can't see them if they're behind someone's head. So that makes my life a little bit easier. Roll eyes, I like that. Perfect. Okay. Any other questions? Any questions before we get started? Okay. Juliana, you are up. Where is it? All right, so tell us, Juliana, what were the facts in Prigg?
Okay, so, Margaret Morgan was the student by John Ashmore, and he allowed her to go to Maryland, where she originally was, to marry a free black man in Pennsylvania.
Very good.
Where she ended up having
Good.
free life.
Now what happened?
He passed away, and I believe his daughter, Margaret Ashmore, wanted to become ownership of her.
Right.
And so she sends Mr. Prigg.
Yeah, who was Prigg? What was his occupation? What was his job?
She just sent him to bring her back.
What do you think his job was? How would you describe his profession? A what?
A bounty.
Yeah, a bounty hunter, but he was a slave catcher. Bounty hunter, yeah, basically.
Yeah, so he goes up there to Pennsylvania where he is successful in bringing her back to Maryland.
Okay.
But I believe
What happened?
Pennsylvania has a statute,
Good.
law that he violates where he has to go through certain channels to retrieve his money and take her back.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So, all of you have probably heard of Dred Scott, right? This is a famous decision which held that people of African descent could never be citizens of the United States. How many of you have ever heard of Prigg v. Pennsylvania before this class? Yeah, basically no one. This decision was so much more significant than Dred Scott ever was, right? This decision was of such a higher level of importance than anything of Dred Scott. Why? Dred Scott was a fairly narrow issue about slavery in the territories, right? But this case involves slavery in the states themselves. And at the time this case was decided, the North and South were basically split, right? Almost all the northern states had eradicated slavery. The southern states depended on slavery as their economic engine. And you had the border states like Maryland, right? You don't really think of it as a southern state, but it was a fairly strong slave state. You had Kentucky, right? Border state. The northern states recognized that slavery would destroy the Union. This was Lincoln's theory. He said you can either have all the states in slavery or all the states without slavery. But Lincoln said a house divided cannot stand. You can't have both. And the reason why is largely because of Prigg. Because imagine if Pennsylvania passed a law, which it did, that if a person who's a slave traveled to Pennsylvania, that person is immediately freed, emancipated as a matter of law. And Pennsylvania says, we're not going to allow slave catchers, bounty hunters, like Prigg, to return these people back to the South. That sort of law could immediately destroy slavery. Why? You'd have a mass exodus. That if slaves were guaranteed freedom in Pennsylvania and elsewhere, they would escape and they'd never be returned under state law. Right? This sort of dynamic where if one state allowed emancipation, the southern state would lose their slaves, was very much on the minds of the framers of the Constitution, who viewed slavery as a necessary evil for ratification. So they included two provisions of the Constitution, which I want you to study. It's Article 4, Section 2, on page,
25.
I'm sorry?
25.
51, I'm sorry. Yeah. Article 4, Section 2. Okay? And it says, a person, it's up here if you don't have your Constitution, a person charged in any state with treason, felony, or other crime, who shall flee from justice and be found in another state, shall, on demand of the executive authority of the state from which he fled, be delivered up to be removed to the state having jurisdiction of the crime. Okay, now, when they say person who flees from justice, right, we're talking about runaway slaves. They don't use the word slaves, but it's really obvious what they're talking about there. Okay. Now, the next paragraph, you look at the bottom of page 51 in your pocket constitutions, you see little brackets, right? And see footnote 10? Footnote 10 says changed by the 13th Amendment. If you go to the actual Constitution in Washington, D.C., the National Archives, and you look at Article 4, there's no little brackets on this provision, right? No one took a quill and put a footnote on the original Constitution. So actually, I don't like that there. It's not accurate. It's a helpful guide for students, but that provision is still in the Constitution. It's under glass. It hasn't been changed in 200 years. In fact, every couple of years ago, the members of Congress decided they want to read the entire Constitution. No one wanted to read this clause, as you can imagine. No one wants to read this clause, as you probably can imagine. But it's there. It's in the Constitution. You have to, you can't ignore it. So let's read this one now. It says, second paragraph. No person held to service or labor in one state, under the laws thereof, held to labor, slaves. Right? They wouldn't use the word, but that's what they're talking about. Shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. Is that Ashley?
Yes.
Ashley, the first paragraph is pretty self-explanatory, right? You have to return runaway slaves. What's the second paragraph getting at?
That if you do, I guess, come across a slave, they have to go back to their original owners. They can't just, like you said, go to Pennsylvania and be free.
But what's this business, in consequence of any law, regulation, be discharged from service? What's that getting at? It's a little bit confusing word. What are they getting at there?
They're, just because they go to Pennsylvania doesn't mean that they're not still a slave.
Ah, exactly. So what this is basically saying is that even if Pennsylvania passes a law which says, by virtue of your entering this state, you are now emancipated, right? This is the old notion that when you breathe free air, you are yourself free. A famous decision, English case called Mansfield's case, right? The Somerset case by Lord Mansfield. And Lord Mansfield said, when you breathe English air, right, you are no longer a slave. It's this beautiful image, which meant you could be a slave in India or the territories, but you couldn't be a slave in England. But the idea is, if there's some sort of local law that says we are discharging you from service by virtue of your entering the state, okay, no good. Such a law would have no effect. Right? What this is basically saying to Pennsylvania is, you can't enact certain types of laws that free slaves. You can't enact it. Why? Supremacy clause. Which is the higher law? You have Article 4 of the Constitution, and you have the Pennsylvania Liberty Statute. That's easy. Constitution controls. But the Constitution controls because it's the higher law, and the court applies the higher law. Okay? So, we have these two provisions. The first paragraph, which, by the way, you notice the first paragraph doesn't have an asterisk next to it. It's still in the Constitution. So in theory, if there's a prisoner who flees from Texas to Oklahoma, Oklahoma's got to give him back. Not much debate about that today. But the second paragraph has these little asterisks next to it, which don't really exist. It says that if basically a runaway slave goes to Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania can't pass a law to emancipate that person, but rather should be delivered upon the claim of the master, of the party whom the labor is due, the owner. Okay? Everyone with me so far? Okay. So, what's the problem then, Sophia? If Miss Morgan ran away from Maryland to Pennsylvania. Whether she had the consent of of the father, she might have had the consent of the daughter. Why is this a hard case? What's going on here? Why is this not just an easy application of the Constitution? Are we just talking about the Article 4 here?
Because if you have consent of your owner, you might also have the owner's consent.
Let me ask the question differently. Was this a case only about the Constitution, the meaning of Article 4? What was at issue here?
The Fugitive Slave Act?
Very good. So we're not talking here about the Constitution, right? This is somewhat of a difficult concept. Let me pause on it for a minute. The Constitution is not self-executing. The Constitution does not enforce itself. Congress passes laws pursuant to the Constitution to implement it, right? So Sophia, tell me, what did the Fugitive Slave Act do?
It made sure that fugitive slaves were able to escape.
How?
By making sure that they had to be returned.
Good. So what the Fugitive Slave Act basically said is that states can't erect barriers to the return of slaves, right? States, like Pennsylvania, can't erect obstacles to the fulfillment of this provision of the Constitution, right? Because what did Pennsylvania try to do? Laura, what did Pennsylvania try to do to make this more difficult to return slaves? Pennsylvania did, some creative stuff here.
So I guess they try to, deter this type of provision
Yeah, how?
by creating obstacles.
What were these obstacles?
That they had to get approval by a federal judge or state.
Yes.
magistrate.
Okay, very good. Pennsylvania tried to erect barriers to the return of the slaves. They required a local judge to have to approve of the transfer of the slave. Or were these Pennsylvania judges going to approve this?
No.
No, they weren't. Okay. Chaz, they also erected another barrier that affected Mr. Prigg very personally. What was this other barrier that affected Mr. Prigg? It was a very significant barrier. What happened to Prigg, right? Why is this case called Prigg v. Pennsylvania? Was this a civil case? What was it? Did Prigg sue the state of Pennsylvania? How did this case arise?
No, this is in federal.
No, it wasn't a federal case. How did this case arise, Chaz? What gave rise to this case? Mina? What gave rise to this case? Was it a civil case?
Prigg's was indicted of kidnapping.
Yes. Everyone see what happened, right? Pennsylvania's like, we got this, right? We're going to make bounty hunters criminals. We'll say, you are guilty of kidnapping Miss Morgan, right? Because you took her away. So basically, Pennsylvania said, we're going to make it really hard for slave catchers to come to our state. First, we're going to make it a crime to physically take the body away. And second, they have to get a judge to sign off on it. Judge is not going to sign off on it. So if the slave catcher tries to take the body away, he's kidnapping, which is a crime. So the reason why this is Prigg v. Pennsylvania is it's a criminal prosecution. It's an appeal from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to the U.S. Supreme Court on a criminal case. Right? Is that Arlene? What was Prigg's defense about why he should not be guilty of this crime? What was his defense?
He said that it was unconstitutional.
Why?
Because it went against the laws.
Exactly, right? Prigg argued that the Fugitive Slave Act preempted state law. Preempted. What does this mean, preempted? Anyone know what preempted means? Yeah. When you have a federal law up here and a state law down here, the federal laws have a higher power and it trumps them with supremacy clause. That's called preemption. Let me type this word for you. Preemption. or preempted is the verb, right? Preemption. Prigg argued that the Pennsylvania statute was unconstitutional because it was preempted by federal law. Okay? Everyone understand that, right? If a federal law says you can't interfere in the slave return process, and the state law says interfere, the federal law trumps the state law. Everyone get that much, right? So then the question was the federal law itself constitutional? Right? If the federal law is unconstitutional, then Pennsylvania is fine. There's no conflict. There's only a conflict if the federal law is valid. So Prigg, even though it arose under this Pennsylvania personal liberty statute, was at heart about the constitutionality of the Fugitive Slave Act. In other words, was the Fugitive Slave Act authorized by Article 4? Right? Did Article 4 of the Constitution authorize the Fugitive Slave Act? So that's, is that Lauren? So did Article 4 authorize the Fugitive Slave Act, according to Justice Story?
No, it didn't.
It didn't?
No.
Was the Fugitive Slave Act unconstitutional?
No.
So did Article 4 authorize the Fugitive Slave Act?
Oh, yes.
Okay, try again. So, did Article 4 authorize the Fugitive Slave Act?
Yes.
Why?
Is it because of the clause?
Okay, so let's read it, right? A person charged in the state, blah, 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 removed, blah, blah, blah. Is there anything in this passage, we read it a couple times, that gives Congress power?
Yes.
Where does it say that?
Oh, no, it says executive authority of the state.
Right, so let's compare this, right? Let's look at one we're familiar with. This one. We've read this one a couple of times already, right? Article 1, Section 8. Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce. Lauren, is there any doubt there that Congress is being given some sort of power?
No.
Okay. Congress shall have the power to declare war. Any doubt about Congress having power? Congress can coin money. Is there any doubt that Congress gains some power there?
No.
Okay. Congress shall have the power to make laws if necessary and proper. Is there any doubt there?
No.
Okay, I agree with you so far, Lauren. Now let's go back up to our Fugitive Slave Clause. Is there anything there that gives the slightest hint that the Constitution is giving Congress powers?
It doesn't say.
This is the argument advanced by Salmon Chase, who became Chief Justice some years later. And a lot of abolitionists made this argument as well. If you look at Article 1, Section 8, power, 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 right? It says it very, very straightforward. If you look at Article 4, though, it says nothing about power. Nothing, Janet?
Doesn't it say executive authority of the state?
That's governors.
Yeah, they're the only ones who can make that decision then, right?
It talks about governors, not Congress. Right, so Stephanie, my question for you is this. How does Story get around this argument, which he concedes, he admits is a good argument, right? How does Story say that Congress can look to Article 4 as a basis to implement the Fugitive Slave Act? Where does Congress get this power? So whenever I ask this question, where does Congress get the power to do X? You got to give me a clause of the Constitution, right? Final, whatever. Does Congress have the power to do X? I want you to give me a clause. Cite and verse, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, whatever it is. I want you to give it to me. So we already said there's no power here. Stephanie, where does Marshall Story get this from?
The necessary and proper clause?
Exactly. Exactly. This is why the answer to your question today, the polling question, was not all the above. It's necessary and proper. The necessary and proper clause gives Congress additional authority to implement the foregoing powers. Now, we said foregoing meant Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 1 through 17, right? Coining money, commerce, etc. This comes in Article 4. Is this a foregoing power? Stephanie, what do you think? Is Article 4 come before Article 1? I mean, we can count. No. Donnie, what do you think? Is this a foregoing power that's listed in Article 4 after Article 1? What do you think? How does Story read it? Is Story troubled by this, what I'm talking about? The fact that the Fugitive Slave Clause is in Article 4, while everything else is in Article 1, Section 8.
I have no clue.
Donnie, how does Story read the necessary and proper clause? Let me ask that question like this. How does he understand the relationship between the Fugitive Slave Clause and necessary and proper? In general, let me ask you a review from last class. How did Marshall understand necessary and proper? Go all the way back to an hour ago in McCullough v. Maryland.
He understood the necessary and proper, pretty much saying that if it was I guess if it was, I forgot the word you used. If it was, I think he said convenient for
Good.
Congress to enact a law to make sure that they follow through with their enumerated powers, then the necessary and proper clause was like, okay.
Okay, good. So we have here this power that governors are required to return runaway slaves, right?
Yeah.
What's Story's argument about how this clause interacts with the necessary and proper clause? What's his argument?
I don't know if I'm reading this right, but or if I'm remembering it right, but is it because like slaves are considered property,
No.
and so
No, that's not relevant here. Sheriff, what's the argument of how the Fugitive Slave Clause interacts with the necessary and proper clause according to Story?
Is it relating to another clause? No.
What can Congress do under the necessary and proper clause? What does it allow Congress to do in general?
Make laws that are necessary and proper
To do what?
to carry out
Carry out what?
justice.
No, not justice. Definitely, that's never the right answer in this class. The answer is never fairness. If that's your answer, you're wrong. Right? It's unfair. That's not the right answer. What does the necessary and proper clause allow Congress to do, Sheriff?
It allows them
I was pointing to the wrong thing over there.
to make any law necessary and proper for carrying into execution of foregoing powers.
And again, what are these foregoing powers?
Everything that's already listed.
Okay, so one argument is everything listed in Article 1, Section 8, which include commerce, etc. But this is in Article 4. So what does Story say, Shara? Link it together. You're almost there. How does Story read it?
Article 4 is in the Constitution.
Yes. Story says, when it says foregoing, it's not just in Article 1. It's the entire Constitution. Right? Including Article 4 and the Fugitive Slave Clause. So what Story says is the same sort of flexibility that John Marshall had with a bank, right? We have to read commerce and necessary and proper working together. We read the Fugitive Slave Clause in the same fashion. Even though there's no direct delegation of power in Article 4, we can still link up the necessary and proper clause as an additional ground of authority. Okay? He writes, the end being required, it has been deemed a just and necessary implication that the means to accomplish it are given also. Right? The Fugitive Slave Act is what they call incidental power. It's not directly enumerated, but it's a helpful law to make the Fugitive Slave Clause work. In other words, in order to have an effective fugitive slave clause, you need to prevent the states from mucking around. You need to prevent the states from arresting slave catchers. You need to prevent the states from putting these judicial requirements of signing off warrants, right? And therefore, because Congress could enact this statute, the Fugitive Slave Act, it preempts the state law. It trumps the state law and allows the federal system to work uninterrupted. That is, the states can't interfere because Congress had the power to regulate that area under the necessary and proper clause. So Prigg, which again is about slavery, and it's an odious case, which you've never heard of, but it's a very significant case, allowed slavery to grow leaps and bounds. This was a far more important case than Dred Scott was, decided nearly 20 years later. 15 years maybe. Okay? Right, so the holding of Prigg, right, the holding of Prigg is that even though Article 4 doesn't give Congress the power to enact the Fugitive Slave Clause, the necessary and proper clause does, because it's an appropriate means of enforcing this federal provision. It's convenient, it's adapted, it's helpful, right? This is what Marshall's opinion in McCulloch v. Maryland gave rise to. Okay, so everyone get Prigg. Questions on Prigg. Very important case most students never actually read. But this was not only an important statement on the incidental powers under the necessary and proper clause, it was also basically opened up slavery and prevented northern states from freeing the runaway slaves. Yeah, Cameron, sir.
One thing I was interested in connecting to the last clause when we were talking about respecting the judge's rulings and opinions.
Oh, yeah.
How many states actually, when this came out?
Oh my God, you're asking such a good question. This question was this, right? Why do people follow judges? There was such a reaction, a negative reaction to this case. Let me put it this way. This was a reviled decision, even worse than Dred Scott at the time. Because this told Pennsylvania that you can't even free slavery against your boundaries. Even though slavery was a matter of statutory law, right? That is, slavery only existed if it was permitted. This was telling Pennsylvania, you can't manage your own state. This is a serious intrusion on states' rights. In fact, there's a note about this in the book, but it's often thought that states' rights is a position that the Southerners preferred. Right? The Southerners wanted states' rights. Here's the opposite. Pennsylvania wanted their own states' rights to get rid of slavery. And it was the Southern states that wanted federal power to intrude on state sovereignty. So often it's the opposite of what you might think. But this decision was reviled, and the abolitionists hated this case. So, for example, Chief Justice Chase wrote arguments of why this was wrong, that Article 4 was not a granted power before going to Article 1. So, arguments, and Storage just dismissed them very casually. Yes, sir.
I was going to ask, so I understand the whole necessary and proper clause, but since the Constitution explicitly says that it should be basically the governors who decide this, the power, was that ever part of the debate, or it didn't matter?
Yeah.
Because Congress, governors, is two completely different things.
Yeah, the argument was this is not for Congress to decide. It's in Article 4, and if you look at Article 4, it governs states. So the argument was this is not for Congress to decide. Now, the sad part is, I think Prigg was going to win no matter what. Even if Congress had never enacted the Fugitive Slave Clause, I think Pennsylvania statute would still be unconstitutional because it's interfering with the federal constitution. So I think Prigg would have won anyway, but this was a very big decision. Yes, sir, Jonathan.
How do you restrain the necessary and proper clause? Because it seems like you stretch it to almost anything to do that.
That is what John Marshall wrought. That's wrought, not wrote. That's what John Marshall's opinion did in McCulloch. Once you say that whatever is convenient or appropriate is permissible, there's really not many limits. There really aren't. So you might love the bank decision in McCulloch, but when you realize what that means for Prigg, the slave catching, it's a totally different ballgame. In fact, the court would not put teeth into this, I think it was Cameron's question earlier, proper until the 1990s and the Obamacare decision. So the necessary and proper clause was basically a blank check for 200 years. And only recently has the court started to scale it back. But Prigg is a decision where it's no broader than McCulloch v. Maryland, right? Story in Prigg didn't go any further than in Marshall, but the same principle in McCulloch upholds the Fugitive Slave Act. Very good question. Anything else on Prigg? Anything on Prigg? No, wrong class. There we are. Right, so here was a typical sign, 1854, offering rewards for runaway slaves. And again, from Maryland. Anyone know the phrase, the Mason-Dixon line? Have you heard this? Right, the Masons were like the Northerners, the Freemasons, and the Dixon, like the Dixies, like Southerners. So if you're driving north from Maryland to Pennsylvania, there's a huge sign that says, now crossing the Mason-Dixon line, right? Because Pennsylvania is proud that, we were the people accepting the freed slaves. If you go the same highway the other way, going south, from Maryland to Pennsylvania, there's no sign. Not so proud of that. But the Maryland-Pennsylvania border was very significant during the Civil War. Even though Maryland was in the Union, didn't join the Confederacy, it was a slave state. There were several border states, Kentucky, Maryland, that were in the Union but maintained slavery. And we'll get to this later, but the Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln's freeing of the slaves, only applied in rebel territories. So Lincoln did not free the slaves in Maryland or Kentucky. We'll get to that later. Yeah. You'll learn a lot of stuff you never knew. Okay. All right, any other questions on Prigg? All right, let's go for something much more boring, oil, right? That's true. Who is next? Hannah, okay. You want to give me the facts, please, in the United States versus Dewitt?
Yes. So basically, Congress enacted a law that restricted the sale of some oil.
Some what?
Oil, like
Yes.
lamp oil.
Uh-huh.
And Dewitt was indicted in Michigan for selling this oil within the state, not across borders.
Okay.
And so he argues that basically that because it was within the borders of the state of Michigan, Congress doesn't have control over.
Okay, very good. So, Hannah, let's look at the Commerce Clause, right? Article 1, Section 8. And it says, Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce among the several states.
Right.
Is the sale of oil here, right, is the sale of oil commerce? Is there any argument about that in this case?
No.
Okay, there's not. So this doesn't really implicate Gibbons v. Ogden, right? There's no doubt that the mixing and the selling of these lamp oils is commerce, so no problem there. So then everything, is that Derek? Derek. Everything then falls on this phrase, among the several states. How does Chief Justice Chase in DeWitt understand this phrase, among the several states?
Interstate?
What does interstate mean? You're right, but tell me what that means.
So like an exchange, like through the states, if it goes from one state to another.
Very good. Right. So traditionally, among the states means selling from, Michigan to Ohio, right? From one state to the next. So in that circumstance, this is a fairly easy case, right? Selling oil is commerce, but it's not among the states. That's easy. But then he goes on to the necessary and proper clause. Chase. What is Chief Justice? Oh, Chase, perfect. What is? This will happen again, never again this semester. Chase, what is Chase's? Chase, what is Chase? What is Chase's opinion? Not yours, but the Chief Justice's opinion about the necessary and proper clause? Because again, if I ask you, is a statute constitutional? You can't stop at the Commerce Clause. You always have to go on to necessary and proper, right? It's the last best hope of statutes, right? Scalia called it that. The last best hope. You always have to go to necessary and proper. So Chase, what's the necessary and proper argument here?
Well, doesn't he say that they're going to argue that it's necessary and proper to carry out the execution of laying and collecting taxes?
Oh, tell me more. Explain why.
Well, he goes into how that's kind of the argument for why, or at least the argument of why it should be allowed. But he talks about how when it's in the internal trade of the state, the legislative authority of Congress excludes all state legislation, for example, this is blah, blah, blah. But it talks about how it should have no constitutional operation.
Okay, Chase, let me ask you a question like this. Can Congress tax oil that's only in one state?
No.
They can. Yeah. Congress's taxing power is very broad. We'll learn this. Congress can tax local oil, right? So if they want to impose what's called an excise tax on whiskey. Remember the Amazon, we'll get frisky with the whiskey? Remember that before? See, you'll learn more from that video than anything else. Congress can impose an excise tax on whiskey or on carriages or anything else. Okay? But this law wasn't merely a tax on whiskey. It made it a crime to sell these oils altogether. But the argument's this, right? If Congress wants to tax something, can they also prohibit it? Jake, isn't this a good way of Congress making money by prohibiting the sale of these dangerous oils? That is, well, you can't sell these oils, but you can sell these other oils which we can tax you on. Oh, you see the thinking, right? You're taxing them on this product, and you're banning the sale of the other one, so people are going to go to the one you can tax on. Jake, what's the argument there? Is that okay?
No.
Why not? What does Chase say? Short opinion, but it gets to it. I know students love one-page opinions. Their favorites.
Because it's too remote.
Yes, exactly right. That's exactly what I'm looking for, right? So the argument's this. If the goal is merely to increase the production sale of other oils, that is too remote, right? In other words, yes, Congress has an interest in taxing oils, but it's not necessary to ban other oils to do so. Let me say that again. Congress can tax oil A, but in order to make money on that tax, it's not necessary to tax and criminalize oil B. Wait a minute, Josh. Wait a minute. Ryan, didn't we just say in Prigg and McCulloch, necessary means like convenient? Isn't it like a helpful way to increase revenue by criminalizing the other stuff? Isn't that what Story said? That in order to have an effective slave recovery system, you need to, get rid of these state laws?
Seems like it, but I think he says something about those are more national concerns, and this is more of a states' right.
Yeah.
Talks about police power.
Good. What's that police power? I mentioned that earlier today.
It's the state's ability to protect the health, safety, wellness, and morals of the people.
Very good. Very good. So there's a tension here, my friends, right? There's a tension. Everyone see the tension first, right? In McCulloch and in Prigg, they were necessary to be really broad. That whatever helps the government out, they can do, right? If they want to have an effective future slave system, they can ban local laws, they can do that. If they want to have an effective taxing system to regulate commerce, they can have a bank. But here, what Chase is saying is, even if they want to increase the money for taxes on oil number 1, they can't criminalize the sale of oil number 2. Will criminalizing this one increase taxes here? Yeah, you betcha, right? You bet it. But he says that's too remote, that it's an implied power too far away. Can you reconcile Prigg with Dewitt? I think Ryan makes a very good effort at doing so. He says, well, Prigg was about slavery, a national issue, right? Here we're talking about oil, local. No argument here. That's a very valid distinction, but I don't think it's a distinction that Marshall or Story would make. So what I think you see here is that Chase did not agree with Prigg. Chase was an abolitionist. He was a remarkable guy. He actually hired a significant number of African Americans and women to work for the federal government. I mean, he was committed to the cause, and he hated Prigg. So here, as Chief Justice, like, screw it, I'm in power now. We're going to narrow Prigg. We're going to limit the scope of the necessary and proper power. And even though it's on, some stupid oil case, it's a precedent of the court. And this case, didn't have that much national implications. I doubt it made the front page of any newspapers, right? It's a fairly small conviction. But it pivoted the direction of where the court's necessary and proper case law was. So, The bottom line of the case, this oil law can't be supported by the Commerce Power. It's not a tax, and it can't be supported by the Necessary and Proper Clause. Therefore, it's unconstitutional. And the conviction of Mr. Dewitt, he goes free, or something like that. How are we doing? Questions on Dewitt? It's a fairly small case, very short, but very significant. Most case books will admit it, not ours. My co-author Randy is obsessed with Justice Chase. He visited his grave in Cincinnati once. He's a fan. I like him also. Okay. Questions on Prigg? Nothing on Prigg? I'm sorry, DeWitt. I'm sorry, wrong case. Back-to-backs get me a little off. Yes, sir, Jonathan.
What year was the Chase Court of Appeals from these years?
Oh, Chief Justice Chase was nominated by Lincoln. Give me a second, I'll Google it, which is something you would do. He was nominated by Lincoln, I'm going to say 1862. I might be off on the year. I'm sorry, it's called 1864. He was nominated, and then Chase died in 1873. So 64 to 73. The other significant point is that Chase replaced Roger Taney, the author of Dred Scott. Taney also joined the majority opinion in Prigg, although he wrote a concurring opinion that went even further in the story. I don't think it's in your book. So it was a fairly short court. Chase died, I think he had was it a stroke? He had bad health and he died abruptly, and then unfortunately fortunate time. Okay, he was a remarkable guy. He's the only, he's one of two justices whose face appears on U.S. currency. The other is John Marshall, who else, right? But Chase is on there in part because Lincoln appointed him as the Secretary of Treasury during the Civil War. And Chase had the difficult job of keeping the budget of the United States in check while in the middle of a war where he couldn't raise taxes. So one of the ways that Chase kept the American finances up is by issuing paper money as legal tender. The next case, as you can tell. Now, you don't think anything of paper money, right? Your wallet's full of it, or if you're millennials, you don't have any cash, I don't know, avocado toast. But the problem is, I'm a millennial also, don't at me. But the problem with paper money is it wasn't valuable, right? It's paper. It's not worth the paper it's written on. What matters was actually gold and silver and coins that had intrinsic worth. Now, there's no problem with the federal government issuing paper money, right? They can print whatever they want. That's not really a problem. The problem is this. Can the government require people to accept this paper money? So if you ever look at a dollar bill, it'll say this is legal tender. And you probably never cared much what that means. What that means is if you are in the United States, you are obligated to accept this paper money as currency, right? If I walk into a store and I hand someone a $5 bill, like, no, give me gold or give me Bitcoin or something, right? That's illegal. You can't not accept U.S. currency. Now, during the Civil War, you can imagine, this was very unpopular. Imagine someone owed you money, owed you a debt, right? Let's say someone owed you $100, and you made that loan before the war. And then after the war, they give you this little piece of paper that says $100. And you go, this is crap, this is not worth anything, give me gold, right? Give me something I can actually have tangible assets for. It's like one of those commercials, right? Give me an actual tangible asset. But the currency is legal tender. So the question with these cases was, could Congress require people to accept this? Now, the irony is that as Secretary of the Treasury, Chase approved the first greenbacks, the first paper money. And then as Chief Justice, he invalidated the very act which he implemented as Secretary of the Treasury. And he actually alludes to saying, yeah, I basically changed my mind. But in fairness, he said, during the Civil War, stuff was really dicey. Like, we didn't know if he'd survive the Union, right? But on reflection, and in hindsight, and with clarity, I had some second thoughts. So it was Chase, whose face is on the currency because of his creation of the greenbacks. I guess if you make money, you put your face on it. I guess that's what you do, right? But it was he who eventually invalidated it in the Hepburn case. Yes, sir, Cameron?
Should he have recused himself?
Good question. Maybe. Yeah, I hadn't actually thought of that. By implementing it, he wasn't really involved in enacting it. That is, laws are passed by Congress and the President. So it wouldn't be surprising that a government official is required to follow the law. He personally thought it was unconstitutional. If he made that view public, he maybe could have recused. I don't know. I didn't consider that before. Maybe I should add to my martial list of shame of failing to recuse. This one's not quite as bad, but it's a closer call, I'll give you that. If he had publicly said it was, well, but the thing is, he would have publicly said it's constitutional. But I'll caveat this a bit. As the Secretary of the Treasury, he works for the President, and very often he's probably articulating his views, not his own. So he might have an independent opinion. But I think your point's well taken. I'm not sure. I'll give it some more thought. Anyway, so we have this first case, Hepburn, right? Who am I up to? Jonathan, you want to give me the facts on Hepburn, please?
Oh, I asked for a passing.
Fine. Okay, Clinton. Hepburn versus Griswold, yeah.
So Hepburn was one of the legal tender cases. This is exactly what you were talking about. There was a debt owed.
Good.
And they tried to pay with greenbacks rather than the old coin money.
Yeah.
And I believe, originally this makes its way up to the Supreme Court. And originally, the original court sided with Mr. Griswold, and then it was overturned, and they sided with Hepburn at the Chancery Court, and then eventually it comes up to the final court.
Okay, very good. So this is a case exactly the scenario described. A debt was owed. Someone tried to pay off this debt with worthless paper money. The creditor is like, whoa, I don't want this. This is worthless. Give me gold. And the courts held that no, this is legal tender, and you are obligated to accept it. Right? You can't demand a currency. Now, one other caveat. Until the 1930s, until Roosevelt's administration, if you took a piece of U.S. currency and you brought it to a Federal Reserve Bank, you could trade in for gold. You could take a $100 bill, whatever it was, and trade in for whatever the rate was for gold. You can't do that anymore. Roosevelt basically said no more gold. And there was lots of cases about whether that was constitutional, which was basically depriving people of the value of their money, it was basically not just paper. But that's a case for another day. So again, this is a case about the necessary and proper clause, right? Evan, is there any clause in the Constitution which says Congress can require people to accept paper money as legal tender?
No.
So what's the argument there why Congress could do this?
Was it to regulate commerce?
Good. Very good. Right? In order to regulate commerce, in order to coin money, is it necessary to give out these greenbacks? Evan, what does Chase say?
His holding is so these debts are contracts between people.
Good.
And that the Constitution prohibits the several states from carrying the obligations of contracts.
Well, there's that also. I'm talking about necessary and proper first. We'll get to contracts a bit later.
Okay.
Does the issuance of greenbacks fall within Congress's necessary and proper powers?
I feel like it should. Yes.
No, I'm not asking your opinion. What does Chase say?
No.
Good, okay. Well, we separate that. What does Chase say? I'll ask your opinion maybe later. But what does Chase say?
That it violates the spirit of the Constitution.
Spirit of the Constitution? What the hell is that? Is this like some sort of ghost floating around? What the spirit? Is it James Madison? Ooh, right? What is this?
It doesn't stretch it's not it doesn't stretch far enough to force the banks to accept money.
Okay, so there's this quote from McCulloch. I can't remember if I read it an hour ago. It's all blurring together now. I should do a 4-hour class. That'd be awesome. I can do it. You can do it too. So McCulloch says this: if the words are appropriate, plainly adapted, reasonably calculated or qualified with limitation, that the means must not be prohibited, but must be, quote, consistent with the letter and spirit of the Constitution. Right? That phrase wasn't McCulloch. Jeffrey, what does that mean, consistent with the letter and spirit of the Constitution?
Mainly it's just that the act has to be in furtherance of what the Constitution gives the powers, or gives them the power to actually do.
Why is this not within the spirit of the Constitution, the Legal Tender Act?
They're allowed to tender money, but it never doesn't actually say they actually have to make people accept some of the money.
Yeah. So what Chase is doing here is adding, you might call, additional layer to McCulloch v. Maryland, right? He's saying if this seems like a really bad idea, it's not proper, right? He doesn't quite come out and say it, but he's saying, look, it's not enough for this to be convenient and appropriate. We have to ask, is this a proper use of federal power? And he says this: could Congress pass a statute compelling all citizens to accept money that's worth less than what's actually due? Right? You're making someone take a $100 greenback that's maybe worth $10? Chase says, it is difficult to conceive what act would take private property without process of law, if such an act would not. So here, contract comes into play. Taking a private property comes into play. What Chase is basically saying here is this is such a terrible idea, this can't possibly fit within the necessary and proper power. This is so outside the norm of what Congress usually does, you can't squeeze it into necessary and proper. That is, as broad as necessary and proper is, it cannot include this. Precisely why? Not clear. How this is reconciled with McCulloch v. Maryland? Doesn't. It uses the language but applies it differently. How is this reconciled with Prigg? It doesn't. So you can see how the little opinion Dewitt about the Super Oil case, right, paves the way for this big, and this was a big deal, this was front page news, right? Big deal on striking down paper money, right? Because think about the consequence of this case. You have a wallet full of paper money that's not worthless. The Supreme Court said, you don't have to accept this, right? But here, we get to the big stuff, right? So, is that Abdul?
Yes, sir.
Was Hepburn the final word on this matter? Was Hepburn the final word on this matter? The Supreme Court's spoken, done, right? Is that what we said last class? It's over. The Supreme Court made its decision. Supreme law of the land, we're done.
No.
No, why not?
The way you worded the question, the answer is no.
That's not, I mean, you gotta get more than that. I asked very good questions, I need good
I know.
answers also. Was this the end of the matter?
It was overruled in Knox versus Lee.
So, barely a year after Hepburn was decided, 2 new members were added to the Supreme Court. And what was a 4-3 decision one way flipped to a 5-4 decision the other way. I want you to think about this for a second. The Supreme Court issued a very significant ruling on the Constitution. A very significant ruling on the Constitution. And the people did not accept it. President Ulysses S. Grant, who came after Johnson, right, did not accept it. And he appointed 2 men to the Supreme Court who were known, right, they had their views known, who were known to support paper money. And almost immediately, they tried to rehear Hepburn. The case was already decided, like, let's hear it again. Very unorthodox, right? Fortunately, that didn't go through. It didn't matter. Another case popped up, raising the exact same issue. This was at Knox, right? V. Lee. And in Knox, the court reversed itself. And I didn't make you read it because I think it's described actually much better in the little excerpt that the court that cites the court. But what the court held in Knox is Hepburn was wrong. Hepburn was not consistent with McCulloch. Hepburn was not consistent with Prigg. Story was right. Marshall was right. Chase was wrong. And Chase bitterly dissented in Knox. And he said, the only thing that's changed has been the composition of the court. The Constitution is exactly the same. But he himself deviated from Marshall. Chase himself had deviated from Story and Prigg because he thought those cases were wrong. This case teaches you, in a nutshell, how the Supreme Court's cases are not consistent. They go up and down. And with Knox v. Lee in the 5-4 decision, paper money was now upheld. Paper money was now upheld as a necessary and proper means of regulating commerce. Right? It's a remarkable holding. I want to pause you on this for a minute. If we take the view of what might be called judicial supremacy, that the court's decisions are final, once Hepburn was decided, that was it. It was over. Why would you even take another case, right? Why would you even consider this question again? Let's just burn all of our paper money and go back to gold. People didn't agree with it. They thought it was wrong. And they actually appointed new judges who would go the other way. And those judges did it almost immediately and went up the other way. So as it turns out, the only person in America, right, who was not required to accept paper money was Miss Hepburn, was it Griswold, whichever one it was, I forget their names, right? There was one person in the country who was not obligated to take this paper money, and it was in Kentucky. Everyone else has to take it except for one person, because she has a Supreme Court judgment in her hand, that she had to have gold. Just think of it for a second. That the entire country is bound by a Knox except for this one person in Kentucky. All right. But that's why I asked, why do people follow courts, right? Let me tell you something else. After Hepburn, people kept accepting the paper money. They didn't stop transacting with it. People largely ignored the opinion, and it was overturned in short order. So questions on Hepburn or Knox? Yes, sir.
So you were saying that, so basically they overruled it with regards to the Legal Tender Act, and you were saying it's because of the necessary and...
Yes.
Anyway, that clause. But isn't it Article 1, Section 8 about the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposed, etc.? Isn't that what they're referring to when they overruled the...
Well, laying taxes is not the same thing as making people accept paper money.
Yeah, so it's not Article 1, Section 8?
No. It helps.
It also
right?
says provide for the common defense, and I think the argument was that the argument was it...
You needed
in
paper
order to
money
fight
for the war.
Exactly.
That was the argument. But that's necessary and proper.
Okay.
Right? It's necessary and proper for the foregoing powers. And one of the foregoing powers was the power to declare war. Although there was never a declaration of war against the South. We'll table that for now. Lincoln said there was no war, it was just states in rebellion. There actually was no war. It was never declared war. Right? But for a period of time, I want you to get this part. That for a minute. In Hepburn, the court said this Legal Tender Act is unconstitutional. Is it resurrected from the dead? Can you unstrike something down? Let me teach you something which you'll never learn in either class. Ready for this? Courts do not strike down laws. Believe me. Courts do not have the power to go into a statute book and erase the statute from the books. Right? A colleague of mine calls this the writ of erasure. Right? Courts can't go into a statute book and cross stuff out. They can't. I'll give you an easy example. So Texas had a law that prohibited sodomy. The Supreme Court found the statute was unconstitutional. They can't. I'll give you an easy example. So Texas had a law that prohibited sodomy. The Supreme Court found the statute was unconstitutional in Lawrence v. Texas. If you go up the Texas Code, guess what? It's still there. Has not been erased. There's a little footnote saying this was declared unconstitutional in Lawrence, but it's still there. Courts cannot strike down laws. All they can do is tell someone, you can't enforce this law. You are not bound by it. Right? What did they say in Hepburn? You are not required to accept this paper money. So the statute was always in the books, the Legal Tender Act. And what happened in Knox, the court said, just kidding, this statute can't be enforced between Knox and Lee. So again, courts do not erase laws. Courts don't have a red marker to cross stuff out. They can simply say, you can't enforce this against you two. Does the judgment extend for everyone? Well, in Hepburn, apparently only one person got the benefit of that statute. But generally the court says we bind everyone everywhere. Can the court bind everyone everywhere? Probably not, but they do it anyway. Long before there was a nationwide injunction, courts were binding everyone everywhere after their decisions. Okay? Don't lose sight of that. Okay. So questions on Hepburn or Knox? Okay, so are we keeping track of the progression, right? You have McCulloch and Prigg, a very broad reading of necessary and proper. You have Dewitt and you have Hepburn, a narrow reading of necessary and proper. And then we get to Knox, we're back to a broad reading of necessary and proper. Everyone following the chronology progression? You'll need to know these, right? I mean this sincerely, but at the end of the semester, you should know by name every case we've studied. Case names are very important. You need to give me case names. I need to know that you know the cases. Exam otherwise. No case names, you're not getting a good grade. So know the cases. Year is not as important because you look up the year once you know the name of the case, but you know the case names and the facts. All right, anything else on Prigg, Knox, Lee, Hepburn? No? We're rolling. Yes, sir, Clinton.
You just said Knox and Lee, that's the same case.
Knox v. Lee, I meant.
Okay.
Thank you. Anything else? All right, let's go to the next one. The next case jumps ahead in time. We jump to an era in time known as the Progressive Era. Now, you may have studied this in college. The Progressive Era doesn't have a fixed starting and stopping date, but it's generally understood to be the 1890s through the 1920s, give or take. Like, it's not a fixed period of time. But, you know, late 1800s, early 1900s, you're in the ballpark. The defining characteristic of the Progressive Era is progress. Except progress, right? I'm dodging your point, right? The idea of the Progressive Era was to make progress with the use of government in various fashions. Passing different types of laws to make things better, worse. So, for example, safety laws. The idea of having clean food is fairly novel. Inspectors in butchers, in bakeries and the like, didn't exist throughout much of recorded history. So one of the aspects of the Progressive Era was to have inspection laws. So you may remember a book called The Jungle by Upton Sinclair about the meatpacking industry in Chicago, right? There's all these awful stories how this meat is disgusting, right? It's kept in really dirty conditions. So the Progressives had a lot of inspection laws. The Progressives also had laws concerning workplace conditions. Minimum wage laws, maximum wage laws, maximum hour laws, right? These are various provisions designed to regulate workplace interactions. They also had laws involving morality, prohibition, bans on prostitution, bans on masturbation. Always, it's in there, right? It's actually a pretty big deal. The Progressives were trying to use the power of government to regulate various aspects of society. Now, what stood in the way of Progressives? The courts. Traditionally, these were areas that were left to individual choice. If a person wanted to work 90 hours a week, which I'm sure all of you do, if you don't, you probably should, or you will at least. If a person wanted to work 90 hours a week, that's his choice or her choice. If a person wanted to work for a low wage, that was his choice or her choice. If a person wanted to buy meat at a dirty bakery, or a dirty butcher shop because it was cheap, that was his or her choice. If a person wanted to masturbate, but you get the drift, right? These were choices of individuals. courts, in many respects, were a lot more conservative. I don't mean that in terms of Republican. They were conservative means of traditional. They didn't want change in the same way progressives did. And the progressive era saw the courts finding unconstitutional state and federal laws. We will do later in the semester the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, which courts said protect what's called a right of contract, or a liberty of contract. If I want to make a contract to work 90 hours a week at a low wage, I can do that. That's my liberty of contract. We'll do that later in the semester. But the courts were also very critical of federal laws that tried to regulate workplace conditions. And these cases implicate the Commerce Clause, the Taxing Power, the Necessary and Proper Clause, as well as the 10th Amendment, which we'll discuss. And the arguments begin with a simple premise. The federal government is a government of enumerated powers. Enumerated powers. The federal government lacks a police power. The police power belongs to the states. That's the power of the states to regulate the health, welfare, safety of the people. And where does that police power come from? I'll ask someone. I'm talking too much. Who's next? Where am I up to? Is your name tag there?
Alan.
Alan. Where does the police power come from?
The executive branch.
Tell me more.
Through the different agencies that they create.
And where do they get the power from?
The Constitution, I think it's Article 2.
Where do the states, Alan, when did the states get their police power? Let me ask a question like that.
The states,
Yeah, when did the states get their police power?
they declared independence.
Oh. Who had the police power before independence?
England.
England, very good. So the thinking's this, right? Before 1776, the police power, right, the power of health, safety, wellness, etc., belonged to the crown, belonged to the king. After independence, that police power devolved to the states. The states then absorbed the police power that the crown had. Right? Andrew, do the states have the same police power today that they had in 1776?
No.
Why not?
Because for one, back then they were larger in a sense. They're colonized.
Why would the states not have the same police power today that they had in 1776? What happened between 1776 and today that's relevant? A lot of stuff happened. What's relevant here? No, that's all right.
Declaration of Independence, Constitution,
Okay.
Declaration Proclamation.
And what about the Constitution would have modified the police powers of the states? What did the Constitution do?
Gave more power to the federal government.
Yes, exactly right. When the people ratified the Constitution in 1789, they surrendered some of their own police power to the central government. By virtue of the Constitution, the states gave up some of their police power to the federal government. What were those powers? Now, what powers did the states give up to the central government?
The power to police the people.
Is it all their police powers?
No, not all.
How do we know what those powers are that they surrendered?
The powers that based on the state's constitution or the state law.
No. In the federal constitution, how do we know what powers the federal government has? Where do we find that? Where do we find that? Kenny?
Articles 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Where are Congress's powers?
Article 1.
Article 1, Section 8. Very good. So I want you to think about it this way, right? When you have Article 1, Section 8, lists all these various powers. Those powers weren't created out of thin air. those were powers that the states surrendered. The states gave Congress the power to appoint money. The states gave Congress the power to declare war. The states gave Congress the power to establish a postal system, right? These were things that were deemed national in nature, and they were for the central government to do, right? So the powers that Congress has came from the states, and those powers are listed in Article 1, Section 8. Okay? But Yvonne, what if a power was not given to the central government? What if the power is not listed in Article 1, Section 8? Who has that power? Exactly. How do we know that? What tells us that? What else? You're actually exactly right. It's better answer I thought of, but what else tells us that? Amendment. You got it?
Yes, sir.
Which one?
10th Amendment.
10th Amendment. Right, turn to page 69, please, your Constitution. You want to read it for us, Yvonne? Page 69. Amendment 10, yep.
The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people.
Very, very good. The 10th Amendment we'll talk about at some length, but it conveys an idea. Whatever powers are not delegated to the United States, that is in Article 1, Section 8, are reserved to the states and the people. That is, unless a state gave a power up, the state keeps it. Everyone understand that concept, right? So the states retain their police power, notwithstanding the ratification of the Constitution. Okay, so is that Alex? Alex?
Yeah.
Alex, let me ask you this question. If Congress has the power to do something, can the states also do that?
No.
How do we know that? What clause?
Supremacy clause.
Thank you. See, this start thinking clauses. This is how you answer questions. Exactly right. Thank you, Alex. Under the supremacy clause, if Congress can do X, that generally means the states can't do X. There are some concurrent areas like taxing, but it's the outlier, right? There's usually preemption, right? If Congress can regulate steamboats going between states, then the states can't do the same. So as Congress's powers increase, the state's police power shrinks. Exactly right. So as Congress can do more stuff, the state's police power shrinks. So the bigger Article 1, Section 8 is, the smaller the state's police power is. So everyone sees that tension, right? There's a tension between the two of them. All right? As you read the word commerce more broad, the federal government's powers grow. And then the state's police power shrinks. So let's go to the first case, right? EC Knight. Okay. Is that April?
Yes.
You want to give me the facts, please, in EC Knight?
So Congress enacted the Antitrust Act.
Good.
And the EC Knight Company was violating.
Okay, good. What does, how is the EC Knight Company violating this antitrust statute?
Oh, I'm sorry. It was an effort to prevent monopolies.
Good.
And EC Knight was a sugar refinery.
Good.
And it was buying off shares from other companies and
Yeah.
was trying to get the majority of it.
Very good.
So it decided
Very good. So, the purpose of this law was to prevent what are called restraints in trade. To prevent one company from adopting too much market share in the sugar field. It was a sweet deal, you could say. Now, traditionally, Nick, which level of government was responsible for managing corporations in Hawaii? The federal government or the state government? Which power does Congress have to regulate corporations within one state? Which power does Congress have to regulate corporations in one state? Do they have such a power?
No.
So traditionally, which branch of government is responsible for regulating corporations? Okay. So what happens if a state actually this is my monopoly, right? What if a state thinks, wow, one company prices are lower, so I'll economy of the state? Before the Sherman Act, could the state have made that judgment?
No,
Why not?
because they're separate.
Could a state have decided before the Sherman Act that they were okay with monopolies?
Yeah.
Okay. After the Sherman Act, could the state make the same judgment? Okay. What was the effect of the Sherman Act?
It prohibited monopolies.
Okay. Was the Sherman Act a federal law or a state law?
Federal.
Okay, good. Try this again. Before the Sherman Act, could the state allow monopolies if they wanted to? After the Sherman Act, could the state allow monopolies? Why not?
Because it's too far reaching and it affected other people.
No. Why could a state no longer permit monopolies after the Sherman Act? What was the problem? I can't hear your name, sir. What's your name, sir?
Oh, Carlos.
Carlos, why could they not enact it after the Sherman Act?
Well, now that's a federal act preventing states.
Exactly. And so what's the problem is the federal act on point? What clause is it? There you go. Supremacy clause. Everyone see that? Because of the Sherman Act, there's now a conflict between the state law and the federal law. There's a conflict. And the states are no longer permitted to exercise their police power to allow monopolies. Maybe the state likes monopolies. Maybe they want a sugar monopoly. Who knows? Who cares, right? But as you expand the federal power, the state's police power contracts. Okay? Is that Michaela? Okay, Michaela, so let me ask you this question, right? Is the production of sugar commerce? What does the court say here? Ah, right. So the court here, very cognizant of the state police power, says, we're going to read commerce in this fashion. Manufacture is not commerce. This law doesn't regulate the sale of sugar. It regulates the production or manufacture. So the court says this is an indirect regulation on commerce, right? Eventually the sugar will be sold. And the sugar will be sold across state lines. No problem there. But this is an indirect regulation. Commerce comes after manufacturing. This law does not regulate the commerce, it regulates manufacturing. And therefore, it's beyond the scope of Congress's authority. Okay? And is that Stacy? Stacy. So because Congress doesn't have the power to regulate these sugar companies, who has that power? Which branch of government? Yes, exactly. So the majority says this is for the states to decide, not Congress. Because it doesn't involve commerce, it involves manufacturing. And it's for Congress to do the commerce part, and for the states to involve manufacturing. Everyone see that? Okay. Regina, what does Justice Harlan say in dissent? By the way, I'm a huge Harlan fan, one of my favorites, but what does Justice Harlan say in dissent? Under which clause? What clause does Harlan talk about that the majority of these ignores? The majority ignores a very important clause we've been talking about for an hour. Yes, ma'am. How does Harlan say the necessary and proper clause is government here?
It basically prevents harm.
Good.
It prevents the harm, so the necessary and proper clause will be what they need to
Good.
control the health.
Very good, very good. What Harlan says is that Congress can regulate commerce, the trade. In order to make a more effective regulation of the trade, why can't Congress go after the production itself? Right? If they can regulate the ultimate product that's shipped, why can't they stop it at the source? In other words, what sense does it make to allow these sugar companies to make monopolistic sugar but they can't sell it, right? All these companies are making these vast amounts of sugar but they can't ship it anywhere. Wouldn't it make more sense just to prohibit it from being made in the first place? That's Harlan's argument, that as a necessary way of preventing the shipment of this sugar, Congress can just ban it in the first place. But wait a minute. So what's your name again? JC. What about Dewitt? Wasn't Dewitt about criminalizing local sale of oil? Does Harlan agree with Dewitt? How do we reconcile those cases?
I would imagine that he disagreed with DeWitt. It's kind of the same thing.
So who did he agree with? Who does Harlan agree with? Which famous justice did he agree with? That we talked about today. Which justices does Harlan agree with? Not Chase, but who? Back up top.
Harlan was dissenting.
Harlan was dissenting, but which famous justice would he agree with?
Would he agree with Marshall?
Marshall in which case?
Only
done three.
Yeah, I don't even know.
Was this more?
Yeah, it's too far back.
Which case we covered today we also agree with?
It's a weird MC.
Harlan.
That's it.
And what other case would Harlan agree with here?
That we call it, and then the
What's it about?
I'll find it here. Would it be slave trade?
Yeah, Prigg. Very good.
Yeah.
Very good. So Harlan's dissent is in agreement with Prigg, Story, and McCulloch, Marshall. Right? He's not reading necessary and proper the same way that Chase was. So you see it goes back and forth. Let me tell you something. Harlan won out. Right? Harlan ultimately prevailed. It's not only a couple years later. So everyone get E.C. Knight, right? They interpret commerce to mean trade but not manufacture. And they don't even talk about necessary and proper. They basically ignore it. And it sounds like, look, even if this can't be regulation of commerce, it's a necessary and proper way of regulating commerce. Any questions on E.C. Knight? Yes, Clinton.
Well, I don't remember who you were talking with. You said that if something's unconstitutional, that forces the states to do it?
Well, the states can do it. They can choose to or not, but it's the state's choice.
Okay, so in the case where you're talking about regulating monopoly, because of the Sherman Act, the states were forced now into...
To stand aside. The states have to, they can't do anything. The states are disabled from regulating antitrust now. They can't take any steps.
So in that case, then the states would still be able to say, hey, yeah, it's fine, but the federal would say that it's not. So the states necessarily, you understand?
The states are displaced. The states might want a monopoly,
yeah,
but they're no longer allowed to have that option.
but they're not forced to enforce.
No, it's federal enforcement. They don't have to enforce
That's
it.
what I was...
This case is called United States versus E.C. Knight, right?
Okay.
It's a federal prosecution.
Okay.
It's not Florida versus E.C. Knight or whatever.
Thank you.
All right, let's do the next case. A little bit easier fact pattern. Warren, give me the facts, please, from Champion versus Ames, which is also called the lottery case. All right, I'll start with you in the next class. Start with you?
John.
Okay, John, I started with you, didn't I? Yeah. You're up. Twice a day, good for you. It happens.
So the Champion defendant shipped a box of lottery tickets from Texas to California. He was arrested for conspiracy to violate the Federal Lottery Act of 1955. The act prohibited importing, mailing, or transporting one lottery ticket from one place to another.
Good.
The defendant obtained writ of habeas corpus to challenge the constitutionality of the act.
Good. Now, who wrote the majority opinion here?
Harlan.
Harlan. Same guy who dissented in E.C. Knight. You see how, based on the composition of the court, these things flip around. 5-4 one way can go 5-4 the other way. Very good. Ava, what was Harlan's holding here? Could Congress criminalize the transportation of lottery tickets?
They said they're against,
Okay, why?
because they can regulate all
Now, why is a lottery ticket commerce? Right? We have no problem interstate, right? Texas, California, we're good with interstate. But why is a lottery ticket commerce? What does commerce mean according to Harlan?
Your question is why is the lottery ticket commerce?
Yes, ma'am. Gabriel, why is a lottery ticket commerce?
It says here that basically carrying of the fly ticket from one state to another entitles the holder to the payment of a certain amount of money.
Exactly.
And that constitutes commerce.
Right. So he takes a much broader opinion. You see, it's a little bit incoherent, right? In EC9, they said, wow, commerce is about trade, not manufacturing. But he didn't say, well, it's commerce because you can get money for it. Can't you get money from manufacturing? They're reading commerce at different levels. They're not consistent. Okay? So you see the word commerce is starting to get bigger and bigger. Harlan wanted to do that. Trey, the second issue is, was this a regulation of commerce? Was this regulating how commerce should be transacted?
More regulated law.
Well, could anyone carry lottery tickets under this law? Was any transportation of lottery tickets permissible?
Yes.
When?
If it was not interstate.
Could you ever ship lottery tickets across state lines? What happens if you did?
You violated
So was this a regulation, or what was this here?
regulation.
Was it regulating how to ship lottery tickets?
It was, there was a ban on it.
Yes, thank you. Prohibition. Right. The second issue is, was this a regulation, or was this a prohibition? And Trey, what does Harlan say? Does it matter?
No.
Okay, it doesn't. The court says it makes no difference whether Congress is regulating it or prohibiting it. Right? Congress can decide that the stream of commerce should not be polluted by carrying lottery tickets. By the way, stream of commerce came from here, right? Not from CIFPRO. Oh, yeah, it's stream of commerce, right? Where can Congress regulate jurisdiction? Ah, right? Yeah. So the stream of commerce can't be polluted by these sinful lottery tickets. Okay? So as a result, it's within Congress's power to not only regulate lottery tickets, but prohibit their transportation altogether. Then he has this bit at the end about public morality. And he basically says that Congress can eliminate stuff that's injurious to public morals. And this might seem like a fair holding, but this is a police power of the state, regulating morality. The federal government traditionally has no role in promoting morality, but Harlan read it in here. Okay. Finally, Harlan says we should be deferential, and we should not strike down laws unless we're really sure about it. Okay. Okay. And by the way, this was a 5-4 case, and the dissent basically said that the police power is for the states and not the federal government, and this runs afoul of the 10th Amendment. All right, questions then on lottery ticket case, Ames. Yes, what?
Does his opinion of police powers constitute a lasting expansion of those police powers to the federal government? Or
What do you mean lasting?
Like with the authority to regulate the morals of the nation?
You know, this goes back and forth. In the next case, Hammer, somewhat intention, right? Hammer was deciding Harlan already passed away by that point. The court goes back and forth in morality. There's no single line of cases. You have to take each case for what it's worth. So other cases, question on the lottery ticket case, Champion v. Ames. You know a case is very important as a nickname. So this is just a lottery ticket case. It's cases sometimes have nicknames, sometimes they don't. For example, the Obamacare case, people tried calling it the healthcare cases, the name never stuck. So now it's just NFIB versus Sibelius, which is a terrible name. But this is what's easy to call a lottery ticket case. Okay, anything else in Ames? All right. let's do the last case, Hammer. Colby, facts and Hammer, please.
Oh, this was about, this was about the child labor and how much that there was a kid that was age 16 and under the age 16, under the age 14, working in the state of Pennsylvania.
It's North Carolina, but yeah, go on. But, yeah, it's fine. State's not important.
It was about interstate commerce and the products of child labor.
Okay, so what exactly was Congress regulating with the with this law?
All the prohibitions that have been brought in against child work in the factory.
Was Congress, Colby, let me ask you this, was Congress regulating the shipment of goods made through child labor?
Yes.
Okay. So Congress was actually trying to regulate the shipment of goods made with child labor, right? So this is different than E.C. Knight. E.C. Knight was about manufacturing sugar, not shipping it. So here Congress tried to get smart. They said, we're going to prohibit the shipment in interstate commerce of any goods made through child labor. Is that Matt?
Matt, yes.
So then why was this not upheld?
They differentiated between the previous states because they said that cotton was not, didn't have a moral purpose, whereas the lottery tickets were.
Okay, well, they distinguished Ames, but why is this not within Congress's commerce powers? What is this really about regulating goods being shipped across state lines? What is this really about?
Child labor.
Yeah, this was really a law about workplace conditions. This was actually a law about workplace conditions. Congress was trying to go backdoor. They were trying to regulate police power stuff through their commerce powers. And the court said that that's not permissible, that they can't regulate through the back door. Because there was nothing wrong with the goods, these weren't damaged, they were harmless, the court said this is beyond Congress's powers. Right? In other words, Congress can't regulate hours and working conditions through their commerce power. This is a local issue. And they actually cite the 10th Amendment, right? Saying that this is for the local government to do, not for the federal government. Okay? But, Scott, why is this not within their necessary and proper powers, right? Why can't Congress decide that we want to free the roads of this inferior goods made by children, and we want to do that by going after child labor in the states? Why can't Congress do that?
It's just saying that this is subject matter delegated to the states.
Yeah. So the majority here, right, this is a 5-4 case. Does the majority here agree with, or which justice do you think this majority would agree with that we studied today? The majority in Hammer, which case is this closest to? And how it reads commerce and necessary and proper?
Or wouldn't be the last one.
Good.
The Prigg, Hepburn.
Good. Hepburn, and which justice wrote that? What's his name?
Chase.
And what? Yeah, Chase. So the majority here in Hammer vs. Dagenhart goes closer to Hepburn and Chief Justice Chase, and goes away from Prigg in the story, and it goes away from McCulloch. So you see how the word necessary is read in such a different fashion by judges within years of each other, and these are 5-4 going back and forth. Now, I'll spare you the surprise. Hammer is no longer good law. This was overturned several years later, in the 1930s, but you need to know how these doctrines evolved. In fact, if you look at the dissent by Justice Holmes, who's almost as overrated as Marshall, I go back and forth, which is more overrated, Holmes says this is the same result in the lottery ticket case, Champion v. Ames, right? Congress can prevent the streams of commerce from being polluted by this inferior goods, and they should be able to do this. If Congress can prevent the shipment of lottery tickets, they can prevent the shipment of child labor furniture, whatever it happened to be. Again, this case was overruled by United States versus Darby. D-A-R-B-Y. I'll read that one in a week or two. Okay, so questions on Hammer. Questions on Hammer, that the majority says that this was not really a regulation of interstate commerce, this was a regulation of workplace conditions, and that's something Congress can't do, that's for the state's police power. Questions on Hammer? All right, let me summarize a bit for today, because we did a lot today. Oh, I'm feeling energized, I feel great. My voice might be gone by 5, but I feel fantastic. The court's interpretation of necessary and commerce has fluctuated over the years. Marshall and Story in McCulloch and Prigg read necessary to be very permissive, to give the government a lot of power. They read commerce to be very broad, to sweep in a lot of activities. Chase read necessary in a much more narrow fashion in Dewitt and Hepburn. But that was quickly overturned in Knox v. Lee. Then, decades later, the progressive era went back and forth. E.C. Knight read commerce very narrowly, and read commerce very narrowly. Champion v. Ames read commerce broadly, and necessary very broadly. And then back in Hammer v. Dagenhart, again, the court read commerce very narrowly, and read necessary very narrowly. This ping-pong back and forth will more or less stop after the New Deal. But it will again change in the 1990s when the court starts abstracting the scope of necessary and commerce. Any questions? Thank you all for your patience. 4 hours. Well done. Thank you so much.